Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Building Power. I am your host, Zakia Sankara Jabbar, and you all can already see we have an amazing show planned for you all today. After much labor, I have the amazing Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen with us today, and we're going to be talking about all things reparations, talking about their new book. And so please, if you're with us today, share this broadcast out with others, and we invite you all to join the conversation. Please post your questions in the comments, and we're just looking forward to having a good time today. I am going to take the time to read both of their bios because they're both very, very well versed in their respective fields. So I am going to start with Kirsten Mullen, ladies first. Kirsten Mullen is a folklorist and the founder of Artifactual. It's an art consulting practice, and Carolina Circuit Writers, which is a literary consortium that brings expressive writers of color to the Carolinas. She was a member of the Freedom Adjaban concept development team that was awarded the Smithsonian Institution's commission to design the National Museum of African American History and Culture here in DC. Under the auspices of the North Carolina Arts Council, she worked to expand the Coastal Folklife Survey. As a faculty member with the Community Folklife Documentation Institute, she's trained students to research and record the state's African American music heritage. Kirsten was a consultant on the North Carolina Museum of History, North Carolina Legends, and Civil Rights exhibition projects. Her writing in museum catalogs, journals, and in commercial media includes Black Culture and History Matter, The American Prospect, which examines the politics of funding Black cultural institutions. She and William Darity are the authors of From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, out now. We will put a link in the comments for folks to go and purchase that. And the book has received the 2021 Lillian Smith Book Award, the 2021 Association for the Study of Negro Life and History Book Prize, and the 2020 Ragan Old North State Award for Nonfiction from North Carolina Literary and Historical Association. Amazing, amazing. The bio for Dr. William Darity, we will begin now. He is the Samuel Du Bois Cook Professor of Public Policy and African American Studies and Economics, and the director of the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center in Social Equity at Duke University. He has served as the chair of the Department of African American Studies and was the founding director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Inequality at Duke. Darity's research focuses on inequality by race, class, ethnicity, stratification economics, schooling, and the racial achievement gap. That's something that's very important to us here at Bright Beam. North-South theories and trade development, the skin shade and labor market outcomes, the economics of reparations, the Atlantic slave trade and the Industrial Revolution, the history of economics, and the social psychological effects of exposure to unemployment. Whew, that's a mouthful. His most recent book, obviously, we just discussed, is From Here to Equality, and we're going to get into that and talk a little bit more about that. Welcome, Kirsten and Sandy. How are you all feeling today?
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Glad to be with you. pleasure.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you. Sandy, I've been following you for a very long time on Twitter. And I actually am friends with one of your proteges, Dr. Derek Hamilton, who was at Ohio State for a little while there at the Kirwan Institute, who is now returned back to New York. So just so thankful for all the work that you've been putting in for many years, and just excited to get right into this conversation. So reparations has been the topic of discussion, I will say to my surprise, for the last couple of years. I know that you clearly have been doing the work for a long time. How do you feel about the work that you care so much about now finally becoming a bit more mainstream in the last several years? Because I see you have been all over the place working with different community groups and others. How do you feel about that? And do you believe that we have a shot at reparations?
Well, I think we're just as surprised as you are.
Right.
when we've been working on the idea of reparations for I guess close to 3 decades between
Right.
us. But we were working on the book for about 10 years before
Wow.
it was actually published. And when we started, when we first signed our contract with the UNC Press, we were hopeful that our book might actually spark a renewed conversation about reparations. So we were actually very, very surprised that when the book was published, there was already a groundswell of attention being
Right.
devoted to reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book comes out kind of riding on a rising wave of interest in reparations, and we were just as startled as anyone else when this happened. But is this something that potentially will happen? We think, I guess, that it's a more propitious moment now than any that we've seen in our lifetime. We're not there yet.
Right.
We like to refer to the fact that in the year 2000, about 4% of white Americans endorsed reparations. That proportion rose to about 16% by 2018.
Wow.
And today it's somewhere in the vicinity of about 30% of white Americans.
Are you serious? That much?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, of course, that means there's 70%.
Right. I'm not sure. Yeah, that's it. But I mean, but from 4%
to 30%, but 30%. And so this is suggestive of the momentum moving in the right direction. And the question is whether or not we can cultivate that support, grow and expand it to the point where Congress would actually adopt a program of reparations.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's absolutely the case. For us, the momentum really ratcheted up in January 2019, when then presidential candidate Marianne Williamson began to speak. Actually, she'd been talking about reparations before, but not in a national forum. And then she invited us to join her virtually for a town hall that she hosted in Charleston. And that was kind of the jumping off point for this public conversation that we've been involved in, mostly virtually. I mean, certainly we had been engaged through a number of mostly academic conferences, and had given talks like to different cultural institutions, but they were not receiving the kind of national media attention. And of course, the events of the summer of 2020 dramatically shifted the whole parameters of the conversation. And I'm speaking here of the horrible murder of George Floyd.
That's right. Yeah.
Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many sad deaths of unarmed Black people at the hands of police. Right. And while these were incidents that many Black people were aware of and were grieving over, it was not as apparent to many white Americans, and certainly not to people around the world, of how how persistent these acts of violence were.
Right.
That it wasn't a one-off, that it wasn't, something that Black people imagined or, had a bad feeling about. But our devices made all of us eyewitnesses
That's
to
right.
these murders, and that has had a tremendous effect
Right.
on this national conversation about reparations.
Absolutely.
I think we need to provide a bit more recognition to Marianne Williamson, because
I agree.
it was relatively courageous. I mean, she offered a lowball figure for the amount of reparations. I think the maximum she ever recommended was about $500 billion, which is far below the minimum that we see in the vicinity of 11 to 12 trillion dollars that's required. But she was willing to risk the slings and arrows of coming out and saying she was in favor of reparations. She went on
she pushed
Antonio
the other
Moore's,
candidates to even acknowledge it.
Exactly.
Right.
She went on Antonio Moore's program, Tone Talks,
I saw that.
for conversation with the ADOS community about her thinking on reparations, and prompted a couple of other candidates ultimately to say that they were in favor of reparations. So one of them was Julian Castro, and the other was Tom Steyer.
That's right.
The whole conversation seemed to shift in 2019, but I think it accelerated after the tragedies of 2020.
That's right.
And also in January 2019, Nancy Pelosi, while giving an address at Howard University, said for the first time, Speaker of the House said that she thought that HR 40 should come out of committee. And, that we should have a reparations study commission. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that she's
exactly
reparations, but, that was, I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about HR 40 and some of the problems with HR 40.
Yes, we're going to get into that for sure.
Okay. But certainly her, making that comment, I think gave cover to a lot of Democrats to talk about the R word, which had been verboten up until that point. I mean, it was kind of political suicide to mention reparations.
Or at least people thought it was.
People thought so. Yeah, they were just very nervous.
Let's talk about that. And, that's one of the things I've been really frustrated with, particularly with the party itself, because of the support. In many places, Democrats can't win without the support of the Black community. The current president was saved, as they say, by Black folks in South Carolina. His campaign was almost on E, and he was almost out of it. But when he won the South Carolina primary, of course, in large part due to the Black folks there, he's now the president of the United States. And, for people to think that it's suicide, it seems to me they should feel that it's suicide not to support reparations, because if you can't win without a certain demographic of people, and that is the case in many places. I used to live in Ohio, and, statewide offices, Democrats certainly cannot win, without Black folks there. Ohio, Black folks are still the largest minority in Ohio. So, that piece has been frustrating. And I saw recently an article where President Biden said, pretty unequivocally, don't expect much out of him on reparations. So, that's why I guess from your perspective, both of you, we have the data. You all have written an entire book that took you 10 years to pull together, all of this information that clearly legitimizes there is a need. I live in the Washington, D.C. region, and I drive past certain places in D.C., and the tent encampments are becoming fuller and fuller of folks that look like me and you, right? Everybody not out there is a lot of them, if not the majority of them, are Black people. You can go to Oakland, you can go to New Orleans, you can go to any city across this country, and the encampments,
Los Angeles,
they're full of us. How is it that we cannot get a serious, a bill, and we can talk about some of you, please talk about some of the problems that you all have with HR 40, to really make Black people as close to being whole as possible?
Well, I don't know. I'll start. I think that one of the issues is that there's not complete solidarity on the part of Black people ourselves on this issue. I think somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 35% of Black Americans would still say that they're opposed to reparations. And then if we look at the remaining proportion, which is the majority who endorse reparations, there's not necessarily a very consistent view on what reparations should constitute.
Sure.
And so as a consequence, our community actually to some degree dilutes the pressure for reparations. So I think that we do need to address the question of having solidarity within our community on what reparations is and on supporting what it is.
Right.
And that would create a climate in which we could create even greater momentum for reparations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a long history of this kind of division. When you think about the early work of reparationist Callie Guy House,
yes,
who had herself been enslaved, she was the target of whisper campaigns of a number of people in the Black community who didn't think that she should be advocating for pensions for the Union veterans or for people who had been enslaved.
Right.
And so I think that part of it is not unusual. You're always going to have some people who will say, well, look at me, I'm doing really well. And you must be deficient since
right.
I don't need reparations. I'm doing so well.
Yeah. I mean, you normally see that on the conservative spectrum, but then you also see, as you mentioned, just some Black people who just believe that is not going to happen, so they won't publicly support it. But still, the majority of us support it, as as you said, Dr. Darity,
right.
Chris. So, is that really a reason as an out? I guess for politicians, especially when we see the racial wealth gap is so wide and widening.
Well, I think when you're looking for a reason not to support a movement,
sure.
Any argument will do.
Right.
And if it appears that Black people, the Black community is divided, then people say, well, we don't want to contribute to this divisive, atmosphere.
Yeah.
Or you all need to get your own situation, get yourselves aligned first, and then we'll come in. But I think it's a real question. Now, we would say sometimes to folks who oppose reparations for whatever grounds. I mean, some people will say, if we accept reparations, then that means we are accepting this label of victim, or this in some ways is dishonoring the ancestors who had been enslaved. Mm-hmm. And we would say, well, first of all, we do have quite a bit of information about what the formerly enslaved wanted.
That's right.
And when you think specifically about the 20 members of communities of faith who met with General Sherman and with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, they said, we want land.
Yes.
We want to be able to till it and take care of it until we are able to raise the funds that we need to make it our own. And they also said we want to be.
They were actually saying they were going to buy it.
They weren't asking for a handout. They were saying, could it, we'll purchase it. Hopefully, it'll be on terms that we can actually meet. And they were willing to support the younger men to enlist in the army, while the women and children and older men tended those crops. But they also wanted to be left alone. As they said, they recognized that there was prejudice against them in the South, and it would take some time before white people accepted them as folks who had full citizenship rights. But they were very clear. They didn't say, "Oh no, we are the the descendants of people who've been enslaved, and we're just going to hold that as our badge of honor. They knew that they were owed a debt.
That's right.
And they were very forthcoming in asking about it. And I don't know if they were aware at the time that white Americans, including recent immigrants from Europe, had begun to receive homestead grants through the Homestead Act of 1862. And of course, Black people were not eligible for those grants initially because it was illegal for them to own. First of all, they were enslaved.
Right.
The majority of them were enslaved, but it was also illegal for them to own property. But we would say to Black people today who have these complaints, there's no compunction. You don't have to accept the reparations.
Right. Let those of us who want it accept.
Right. Exactly. Sign right here. Sign right here, and what would have been yours or your family's, reparations payment will go back to the common pot and be redistributed to someone else. I've never heard anyone agree to those terms.
That's right. Right. Yeah, I have not heard people. Let's move on, because recently the Congressional Black Caucus, just within the last couple of days, I want to say maybe last week, they released their bold agenda for what they want to get done this year, under this new president. And one of them was HR 40. And you all mentioned, we want to get into what so number one, if you all can share with the audience, because we don't want to assume people know what HR 40 is, even though it was introduced for the last 35, 40 years. Can you just share a little bit about what is HR 40 and what are some of the shortcomings from your perspective that it has, and what would you propose instead?
Somebody, if you'll say what it is, and I can sort of talk about some of the shortcomings to start. Okay.
Before that, though, I think it's important that we make clear what our precise sense is of what a reparations plan should look like.
Let's do it. Yes, please.
Okay. So we start with a declaration that the eligible recipients for reparations must be Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And we set out two criteria for eligibility. Mm-hmm. The first is what we refer to as a lineage standard, which is an individual would have to show that they have at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. The second is what we refer to as an identity standard. So for at least 12 years before the enactment of a reparations plan or the enactment of a commission to study reparations, whichever comes first, an individual would have had to have self-identified on an official document as Black, Negro, African American, or Afro American. So that's the first characteristic of a reparations plan. We have to be specific about whom is eligible. The second characteristic is that the plan must be designed to eliminate the Black-white wealth chasm in the United States.
Right.
That gap is so large that at present, the average Black household has a net worth that is $840,000 less than the average white household.
Wow.
Yeah. Another way to think about it is Black Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States are about 12% of the nation's population, mm-hmm. but possess less than 2% of the nation's wealth. Right. And we think that this is primarily a consequence of federal policy. Starting with the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with the 40 acres while giving white households 160 acres.
And new immigrants. Thank you for the history lesson. They even gave new white immigrants a leg up.
Who were not yet citizens per se. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But this is how we get to that number on the low end of $11 trillion.
That's right. That's what would be required to eliminate the present racial wealth gap. So that's the second attribute of the plan that we think is essential. The third is direct payments must be made to the eligible recipients. Okay. We think that the eligible recipients ultimately should have full discretion over the use of the funds. Now, not necessarily given to them in the form of a direct cash payment, You could have something that's less liquid, like an annuity or an endowment or a trust account. But ultimately, the individual recipient should have full discretion over how the funds are actually going to be used. And then the final characteristic is that this is a project that must be funded by the federal government. And there are two reasons. The first is the federal government is the culpable party. It's the federal government that sanctioned the discriminatory delivery of land under the Homestead Acts. It's the federal government that permitted 100 massacres to take place between the end of the Civil War and the 1940s without punishing anyone or without providing any form of redress to the victims. It's the federal government that introduced redlining. It's the federal government that had introduced the GI Bill and had it administered in a discriminatory fashion. So the federal government is the culpable party. But the federal government is also the capable party, because it's only the federal government that really can meet a bill as large as 11 to 12 trillion dollars. The entire budgets for all state and local governments combined today are less than $3.5 trillion.
Wow.
So they would have to devote their entire budgets to a reparations fund for 4 consecutive years to get close to the 11 to 12 trillion dollar figure. So those are the 4 characteristics of a reparations plan. And the problem we have with HR 40, and Kirsten is going to talk about this in greater detail now. The problem we have with HR 40 is it is not designed to get us from here to there.
Yeah. So none of those 4 basic, principles are in HR 40. None of those. All right. But in addition to that, the structure of the commission itself has a lot of weaknesses. The bill has changed dramatically since it was first introduced in 1989. The budget has gone from $8 million to 12, now $20 million. The number of commissioners was originally 7, then it jumped to 13, now it's 15. The salaries. So this is very interesting. Commissions of this sort, of this type, almost never have salaries. The commission members serve as volunteers. Their expenses are covered, and they have access to a professional staff, and they are salaried individuals. But the idea is that the commission members are reviewing materials. They are not, actively conducting research. This is not a day-to-day, it's not a full-time job. And so we're kind of puzzled about why they're insisting on salaries. But not only that,
how much are the salaries?
The salary is $172,000 a year. So this is executive level 4 on the federal pay scale, which is quite high. And they've lengthened the amount of time that the commission has to do its work so they can earn that salary for a longer period of time.
That's ridiculous.
But we are just
I didn't know that
about just the possible charges of impropriety. In addition, a quorum is defined as 7 members, so 7 of 15, so not even the majority.
Not even the majority.
Not even the majority. And the director of the commission, who would not be appointed by any of the legislators. So was it 3 appointed by the president, 3 by the Speaker of the House, 3 by the President pro tempore of the Senate. But the director, him or herself, the administrative director, would have the authority to choose 6 people. So this director, who's not appointed by any elected official, gets to pick 6 of the 15 and would only need one other person to have a quorum and could make whatever decisions they choose. So then on top of that, the bill indicates that the commission will be exempt from the Federal Advisory Act. The Federal Advisory Act was put in place in the 70s to make sure that commissions operate in daylight, that there be public involvement in the form of hearings, that the minutes, the notes, the transcripts be made available to the public. This commission will be exempt from that requirement.
Wow.
Consequently, any reports, any recommendations they make could be held until the very end, after it's too late to make any changes. It's just odd. On top of that, they have mandated that no elected officials and no government employees may serve. So what that means is no mayors, no governors, no cabinet members, no senators, no members of the House may serve, and no government employees may serve. So it's just odd, very odd. For the most part, commissions of this type almost always have members of Congress who serve, which you hope that will increase the credibility of the commission, its integrity. Elected officials are responsible, must be responsive to their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
This commission is responsible to no one.
Wow.
Why is that?
I have some ideas. Go ahead.
There's some curious things about the way it's put together. And, for us, a commission of this type this is a sacred mission. And we don't believe that these individuals should be paid. They should be volunteers. The work, they have a professional staff that is conducting research that, when you look at, for example, the California Department of Justice Reparations project.
Yes, tell me what you think about that.
So they have the task force has the staff of the Department of Justice at its disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is to review the materials, and they have funds to hire scholars, special consultants. The SMEs, what the M stands for, but subject matter experts who will be paid. But the idea is that they are reviewing and making decisions about the materials that other professionals have generated at their will, at their instruction. But it's not necessarily, conceived that you will have to, there's so much work involved that you have to quit your day job in order to do this work. Right. And we have some questions about an individual who would not serve unless they received $172,000. So it's just odd. I mean, these are the changes that were made in the most recent markup. And, when we have talked to individuals, including elected officials, about HR 40 and begin to talk about the bill at this level of detail, I won't say who the individual was who said, "How do you know that?" And we said, "It's in the bill. It's in the bill."
So you can tell these people not even reading the bill.
Exactly.
But, what we have learned is that's probably fairly common, sadly. Yeah. But you would hope that their staffs would have read the bill. But that is often not the case. Yeah. And this is the case with individuals who signed on to the bill a decade or more ago. Everyone assumed that, the bill was written in good conscience, with good intention, and that they understood, or if they did read the bill, that they understood the implications of the bill. And I will say, 5 years ago, we hadn't read the bill. And we were shocked when we finally sat down and thought, oh, is this what HR 40 says?
Right.
It's problematic,
And it doesn't say.
There's more about what's not there. Yeah. I mean, there's some other fine points too. Like, it starts the clock with 1619.
What?
But the federal government, the Republic didn't exist in 1619.
Right.
So we start the clock at 1776.
Okay.
If the federal government is the culpable party, you need to have a federal government in place, in order to make a claim. But
these people are playing games. Let me tell you, not to cut you off, Kristen, but I'm gonna tell you what I hear. And I work in the social justice space, and I see this a lot, and it's very unfortunate. To me, it sounds like they're implementing the nonprofit industrial complex model, as you said, for this sacred mission. They're going to have 15 people I'm sure the majority of them will be Black. You're going to have probably the heads of all these big so-called Black-led organizations that will be receiving these salaries on this commission, and they're going to ride that train out. And at the end of the day, the majority of Black folks in this country will be left out. Now, you don't have to agree with that. I'm telling you how, listening to you, what I hear. And that's what I hear. It's a class issue. Back to your point, Sandy, earlier, that there is not a solidarity within the community, and then you have these sort of Black elites who continue to be gatekeeping what the majority of the people of Black folks in this country actually need access to. Now, they don't need to take no 5 and 10 years. Listen, you all just wrote a book. There were books that was written before you all. There are organizations that's been doing work before you all. You brought up Callie House. I can think of Queen Mother Moore. Black folks have been doing this work for decades. It don't take that long to study this. It's time for the United States. I'm serious. I mean, we need a bill that says, okay, we can grant it. Let's study sort of, how much here. Okay, well, how are we going to do this? Sort of like what you all outlined. That could be what the actual study is for. The study shouldn't be about, starting the clock all the way over and forgetting about all this work that people have already done on this sacred mission to be, to ensure that Black folks get what's needed and really what's deserved. You know what I mean? And it's really frustrating to hear you all lay that out because I have not read clearly all of the bill myself. I think I had a version.
It's not long. It's not.
Yeah, that's what I said. I had a version that was much earlier when Conyers was still over it.
Right.
So,
I mean, it is written in arcane language.
Right.
It's like the Old Testament, a lot of begats, but in this case, there's a lot of whereases. But, in some ways, you almost get the sense that the authors of the bill, well, I should say certainly the authors of the write-up of the bill, who are probably some of the same people who were involved in the original language, the original text, perhaps for whatever reason, I don't know what's in their heart, don't actually think reparations is possible.
Wow.
But that they who serve on the commission will get reparations.
They getting it, right. 15, think about that, 15 people.
Yeah.
And we can't do that without having at least one white person involved. So one of them commissioners is going to have to be white. I'm serious. I mean, I don't expect you all to agree with that, but I'm serious. Like, it's not going to even be all Black people. Yeah. So that's really frustrating. Yeah. We're in an emergency. We've been in an emergency for a very long time. And, I'm sure you all see how technology is revolutionizing everything from, financial, where there's fintech, there's all of these different things, and it's not slowing down. It's really speeding up. We're dealing with, artificial intelligence. And I'm bringing all of these things up because a lot of the jobs that poor and working class Black folks are doing now will not be there by 2030.
No.
And so that's why even more right now, this is an emergency. And I also would love to get you all's thoughts on this idea, because I see some conflation happening within like community organizations and community where everybody is calling everything reparations now. Yeah. Everybody calling everything reparations now because it's the new buzzword. And I always push back when people describe what everybody is going to get with this Andrew Yang, $1,000 a month, no strings attached, where, it's really strings attached, but no strings attached, this payment that everybody will get as reparations. And they have actually siphoned some Black folks off of actual reparations for descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States to go towards this more universal approach.
Right. So there are three kinds of off-ramps that are presented by some folks who appear to be advocates of reparations,
right? But
they really are detours.
Yeah.
So one of those is HR 40 itself, as currently written.
Yes.
But the other two are universal programs as substitutes for reparations
Right.
instead of being treated as complements for reparations. And then the third is all of these piecemeal local so-called reparations initiatives. And as we pointed out earlier, if you were to take all the budgets of all the state and local governments and add them up, they could not meet the bill that's required to eliminate the racial wealth gap. They simply can't. They don't have the resources that would allow them to do that. So it's a bit disingenuous when people in local communities claim that they're conducting something like a reparations plan. They're not, and they're not because they can't. And so that's also a distraction from the hard work that needs to be done to make the Congress adopt a comprehensive national program of reparations.
I mean, there's such a tremendous desire among a lot of communities to have a halo placed on their heads. But it's like you haven't done the work.
Right.
And, what we would say to those groups, those cities and programs is, your project is fine if it's going to engender some goodwill in your community. If the city is recognizing, as Austin, Texas did, as Evanston did, that they had discriminated.
St. Paul now have one too. St. Paul, Minnesota now has a commission.
But they discriminated against Black people in the housing market. I'm sure that Evanston and Austin discriminated against Black people in other areas aside from the housing market. But let's just focus on that one for a moment. For 50 years, from 1919 to 1969, Evanston discriminated against Black people in the housing market. But they've set aside a fund that will have a maximum of $10 million and it can be executed over a 10-year period as the horizon. $25,000 housing grants, basically. These are money that can be used for the down payment on a new house in Evanston, nowhere else, or money for maintenance repair on existing house. Now, you can't buy a house, a new house with a $25,000 down payment. So you've got to have money, from some other source to cover the rest of the down payment, and have sufficient resources to pay that, significantly, high monthly mortgage rate.
Right.
It's not direct payments. The money goes directly to the bank. Yes.
Wow.
If you are a renter who's not thinking about buying a house, there's nothing there for you, even if your family had been discriminated against. If you have left Evanston, but your family was discriminated against in the housing market, there's nothing for you.
Wow.
And if you say, well, I don't really need any help with my house, but I could use some money from my retirement account.
Right.
Or I'd like to purchase some commercial property, or I'd like to, invest in an annuity. No, that's not possible, because this program is really targeted at housing, which is why it should be called a housing voucher program, which is what it in fact is, and not reparations. When we look at programs like the Japanese American Redress Initiative,
I was going to bring that up. Their reparations,
one of the things that we learned is that they reluctantly, but very determinedly, narrowed the focus on who was eligible in order to increase the likelihood that they could get that initiative passed. The United States not only incarcerated Japanese Americans, they also incarcerated Japanese Latinos who were in Central and South America, and put them in these camps. But
they left them out.
These prisoner camps. Initially, yes, but it was a struggle. It was a big struggle because they knew that those people had suffered as they had suffered. But you had, legislators saying, we're not going to pay reparations to non-American citizens.
Right.
But eventually they were able to include them. Now that group received a much smaller, they received letters of apology from the president, but a much smaller award. Mm-hmm. But they were not able to make the thing happen initially because the definition was just too nebulous. So, specificity is really important, especially when you have opponents who are just looking to see what they can pick off, in order to discredit the whole effort. And we just don't think that these city initiatives are an on-ramp. We think that they're just the opposite. That folks will say, well, you've got this program in Asheville, you've got this program in Austin and Burlington, et cetera. You don't need reparations. But for all the people who don't live in those places, and for the people who live in those places but don't qualify, they're left in the cold. And these projects are not going to move the needle when you're talking about a goal of eliminating the racial wealth gap.
Yeah, we estimate that if a city like Evanston actually made a commitment to eliminate the racial wealth gap for its citizens, its current citizens, residents who are descendants of persons, Black descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States, it would cost the city about $300 million. And the city's total budget is their total budget is closer to three. I'm sorry, it would cost the city $3.3 billion, but the city's total budget is about $300 million. Okay?
Wow, and that's just a small city.
And that's just one small city. Yeah. I mean, you could take Amherst, Massachusetts, which is a considerably smaller town, has only about 2,000 Black people who would be eligible for some form of reparations.
So only 600 million.
That's right. It would cost $600 million there, but Amherst's total budget is about $25 million. So, there's a disconnect here. So once you identify the goal as eliminating the racial wealth gap, the limitations of piecemeal initiatives at the state or local level becomes very, very clear.
Look specifically at these housing programs. They were a part of a federal initiative of redlining.
Yes.
You had the federal government making partnership with cities, but with banks and lending institutions to create this situation with red. I mean, they taught them how to redline, how to create the red lines and how to evaluate these properties. So you're talking about a federal program.
The federal program required it at one point, right?
Yes.
That you could not even sell to Blacks.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
So these are federal initiatives that were administered on the state and local level. So you're not even talking about a local, yes, the local folks did follow through and enforce these projects and expand them. But the idea itself came from the federal government. And this is, one of the reasons why we say the federal government is culpable.
Yeah.
And the federal government needs to pay that.
I mean, that's the big point of the book that people are referring to frequently, Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law.
Right.
That's the entire point, that redlining was essentially a federal project.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that book has been talked about at length as well. I wanted to move it because we have maybe about 12 more minutes in this segment here, and I'm so glad that you all came here. We have a lot of people in the comments. People are very much participating. And one of the questions that keeps coming up, because people were just as surprised as I was about the different issues that you all laid out about HR 40. People want to know what the next steps are, because right now, HR 40 is being marketed pretty heavily to the community and to others. As I mentioned, the Congressional Black Caucus has it as a part of their big legislative agenda. And so what could or should be done? Should HR 40 at this point be amended, or should it just be scrapped and we have an entirely new bill? If Kirsten and Sandy had an opportunity to write a bill for the descendants of Africans enslaved here in the United States, what would that be?
I mean, Sandy's, at the beginning, talked about the four major points that are, the four major pieces that are missing from HR 40. It doesn't identify the eligible recipients.
Right.
We talked about the lineage standard. We talked about the identity standards. These are people who are descended from those folks who were promised and denied those 40-acre land grants, and then individuals who self-identify as Black, African American, Afro-American, or Negro 12 years prior to the creation of a reparations program or a reparations commission. Direct payments to the eligible recipients, but then the direct payments are all about eliminating that racial wealth gap.
Right.
And the federal government would be the culpable party and the one who must pay. If HR 40 could be revised to have all of that included, that would be huge.
Right.
I don't know what the likelihood of that is. It might make more sense to scrap HR 40 and start over, or if it were possible for the president to create an executive committee that would do exactly that. That would be something to say. But I think it was important for your listeners to take a look at HR 40 and to contact your representatives and say, I understand that there are problems with HR 40. Here are what here are 4 things that you need to specifically address. But please be aware that I don't support HR 40 as it's currently written.
Okay.
We've had to negotiate a somewhat tricky tightrope because we are passionate advocates of comprehensive reparations for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery, but we are opposed to HR 40. And I think that HR 40 has been used as a mechanism for folks to virtue signal that they're on the right side of things for reparations, when in fact they don't necessarily have to be on the right side of things with respect to
Yeah. Right. That's right.
It's really unfortunate that that's the vehicle that we have.
Yeah.
But I think it's, but we can understand nuances and subtleties, and I think it's important. Your legislators do listen when they receive large numbers of letters and texts and calls that say, wait a minute, this HR 40 is not what you think it is. And here's an article that you might want to consult to learn a bit more about it. But if we do nothing, the train will keep going. And HR 40 will run its course, and we will not have a national program of reparations. I would say to all these folks who are in cities that are considering or already have in place these local initiatives, to put as much energy and effort, resources, and time into advocating for a national reparations program. This can be done through lobbying and petitioning Congress, writing a letter, encouraging not only your city council or county commission to pass a resolution, not to pass HR 40, but to advocate for a national program of reparations. But you could also do this through your formal and informal connections. Your family could declare a resolution and mail it in. Your fellow coworkers, but also your book club group, your artisanal beer collective, your ultimate Frisbee group, all of these entities, the folks who, in your bridge party or your sorority, et cetera. There are a lot of ways that we can let elected officials know that this is something that really matters. To be someone who is an entrepreneur and say, I'm investing in my community and I want the U.S. Congress to invest in Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. That's powerful.
That's right. Well, to your point, I don't know if you all saw this, but Bob Johnson, the founder of BET, no longer owns it, has been on the record supporting reparations. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the numbers that he put out.
He's calling for $17 trillion, and our attitude is the higher the number, the better.
Yeah.
But I think we want to encourage people to actually take a look at HR 40, but specifically the version of HR 40 that came out of the markup session that the House Judiciary Committee held in mid-April. That's what people really must look at, because that's the piece of legislation that is being prompted to be brought to the floor of the House for a vote.
Right.
There's the structural flaws in the way the commission is put together. I think will make a lot of people question, like, what is this? Why, would you allow a minority to be a quorum? What's going on here? Why would you exclude government employees, government officials from serving? Why would you
because they have no plan on actually giving us reparations. That's why.
I don't know, but why would you? Why would you?
Well, that government employees and civil servants, if they serve on these
cannot
commissions,
be paid.
They can't be paid.
So they want to make sure that all the individuals
on the commission gets to be paid.
Wow.
Why would you want to have a commission that did not have to give public involvement? Public, they had to disclose the work that they were doing, their actions, the recommendations, et cetera, as they were going along. It doesn't bode confidence. It doesn't make you feel, I don't know, it just raises a lot of questions.
It does.
And that's not what we need. That's not what we need.
That is not what we need. I want to read a synopsis of the book, and I'm going to have the link for the people to purchase the book in the chat again. But I'm going to read the synopsis of From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. Today's Black-white wealth gap originated with the unfulfilled promise of 40 acres in 1865. The payment of this debt in the 21st century is feasible and at least 155 years overdue. And From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, William Darity and Kirsten Mullen advance a general definition of reparations as a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure. Acknowledgement constitutes the culpable party's admission of responsibility for the atrocity. Admission should include recognition of the damages inflicted upon the enslaved and their descendants and the advantages gained by the culpable party. Redress constitutes the act of restitution, the steps taken to heal the wound. And so in this context, it means erasure of the Black-white wealth gap. Enclosure constitutes an agreement by both victims and the perpetrators that the account is settled. So we're going to put the link back into the chat. Make sure you go out and purchase that book. And I actually want to encourage people to start book clubs if you haven't already. I did see one commenter said they've actually already read the book, but I think it would be helpful if all of us started our own, just to become more knowledgeable. So when we are writing letters and when we are calling our legislators, we can come armed with the facts, right? That took you all 10 years to put together. And so we want to honor all of that work. Finally, and this is my last question before we wrap up, what do you say to the naysayers that say, well, the United States, the economy is bad right now. They can't afford to pay reparations to the descendants of Black people. We can't afford it. And I will, kind of preface it and add my own little sauce to it. We saw a whole lot of money printing last year.
Yes, absolutely.
That's our response.
Listen, y'all came up with all kind of quantitative easing, to prop up this economy.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what it would do for the economy if Black people were made as close to whole as possible?
I mean, we absolutely agree with you. We certainly saw with the relief for COVID that the United States has the capacity.
That's right.
to pay the bill. Or if you look just a few years back at the bailout for the banks. And
that's right.
Done without an increase in our taxes. It's absolutely can be done. The one concern might be that if a large amount of money hits the market all at once, that there might be some inflation, some inflation risk. But, you could stretch the payments out, we'd say a maximum of 10 years.
Yeah.
Or make some of them illiquid. Like Sandy said, they don't all have to be, all of it doesn't have to be cash. It could be, endowment funds or annuity or a trust account.
To start a business. Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
For example, but yes, we absolutely know how to do it. And we have the ability to do it. The question is, do we have the will? And as we say, we are the champions. Your listeners are the champions. And the way that you step into that role is by actively contacting your legislators and letting them know that this is something that matters to you. Yeah.
That's right. And Sandy, do you have any closing comments for our audience? This has been great.
No, I don't have anything to add to that. That was great.
Yeah. No, this is good. We really appreciate you all. I will certainly continue to follow you and keep in touch with you on Twitter, Sandy. And thank you all so much for your work. Just the amount of probably sleepless nights sometimes, putting that book together, I'm sure was a labor of love for both of you. And we certainly hope that it is used to leverage something material for Black folks. It's past time. It's past time. We continue to vote. We continue to do all the things, and we continue to not be taken seriously, I would say. The other thing that I'll say before we leave, and one of the things that I kind of mentioned earlier about being frustrated with particularly the party, because Black people are solidly deadlocked in the Democratic Party. We can't even get reparations on the Democratic Party's agenda. Like their whole, what I mean? It can't even, it should have been there decades ago, really for us. But that's certainly a conversation at another time. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you all so much. Make sure you all go out and purchase the book and start those book clubs. So you'll have the information you need to lobby your representative. And again, your federal representative. Mine is Representative Jamie Raskin. And the last time I actually checked here in suburban DC, he had not signed on to HR 40. So now I guess that's a good thing. Thank you all so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for inviting us.
Bye-bye.